There are some characters who make people laugh. And then there are characters who quietly change the entire feeling of a story without most people even realizing it. Violet Crawley did both. She could destroy a person with one sentence, silence an entire room with a single look, and somehow still make the audience love her more every season. But the real reason people never forgot Violet Crawley was not because she was funny. It was because behind every sharp line, every raised eyebrow, and every perfectly timed insult, there was something much deeper hiding underneath. Pain, loneliness, fear, love, and the strange sadness of watching the world you once understood slowly disappear in front of your eyes. Most people remember Violet Crawley as the witty old woman from Downton Abbey. But the truth is, she was something far more complicated than that. She was a survivor, a woman who spent her entire life learning how to hide her emotions so well that even her own family sometimes forgot they existed. And once you truly understand that about her, you begin to see every single moment of hers in a completely different way. There is a reason Violet Crawley feels larger than almost every other character in Downton Abbey, even when she is sitting quietly in the corner of a room saying almost nothing. The moment she appears on screen, the atmosphere changes. Conversations become sharper. People sit straighter. Even characters who disagree with her seem aware that they are standing in the presence of someone who understands the world better than they do. That kind of presence cannot be created through dialogue alone. It comes from history. And Violet carried more history inside her than almost anyone else in the entire series. She belonged to a generation that was slowly disappearing, a world built on strict rules, family honor, social hierarchy, and emotional control. By the time Downton Abbey begins, that world is already collapsing. New ideas are entering society. Women are demanding freedom. Technology is changing daily life. Traditions that once seemed permanent are beginning to look fragile. And Violet sees all of it happening in real time. That is what makes her so fascinating. She is not simply an old woman refusing to accept change. She is a woman watching the foundations of her entire identity slowly crack beneath her feet while trying to maintain dignity through all of it. What made Violet different from many characters who resist change is that deep down, she actually understood what was happening better than anyone else. She saw the future coming long before others did. The difference is that she mourned what was being lost, while everyone else rushed toward what was next. That sadness sits underneath almost every conversation she has. Even her humor often feels like a shield, protecting her from emotions she refuses to fully express. Her famous line about not understanding what a weekend is became one of the most quoted moments in television history because people thought it was simply funny. And yes, it was funny, but the line also revealed something important about her. Violet came from a life where duty never stopped, where status demanded constant performance, where appearances mattered every hour of every day. The idea of separating life into work days and rest days genuinely felt foreign to someone raised in her world. That one small joke quietly revealed the enormous distance between Violet's generation and the modern world forming around her. And that is why her relationship with the younger members of the Crawley family became so emotionally powerful, especially with Mary. Out of all her grandchildren, Mary was the one most like her. Both women carried themselves with pride. Both hid vulnerability behind intelligence and composure. Both refused to let others see weakness. But Mary belonged to a new century, while Violet belonged to the old one. Their conversations often felt like two versions of womanhood speaking to each other across time itself. Violet challenged Mary constantly, but hidden inside those challenges was admiration. She recognized her own strength inside Mary, and perhaps even saw a version of herself that could have existed if she had been born into a different era. Their bond was not soft or openly emotional. Violet rarely expressed affection directly because she had been taught her entire life that emotions should remain controlled and private. But love existed in the advice she gave, in the warnings she offered, and in the way she always seemed to appear when her family needed guidance most. That was the strange thing about Violet Crawley. She often sounded cold while doing deeply loving things. She protected people while pretending she was simply correcting them. She comforted others without ever allowing herself to appear sentimental. And because of that, many viewers misunderstood her during the early seasons. They saw the sharp tongue before they saw the heart behind it. But slowly, The series began revealing tiny cracks in her armor, small moments where the audience could finally see the woman hidden underneath the legend. And those moments changed everything. Because beneath all the sarcasm and intelligence was someone carrying enormous emotional weight. Violet had loved and lost. She had buried people she cared about. She had watched time erase the world she once understood. She had spent decades maintaining composure because women of her generation were taught survival through restraint. Feel deeply, but never let the world see it. That is why her friendship with Isabel Crawley became one of the greatest relationships in the entire series. At first, they seemed completely incompatible. Isabel represented progress, openness, and emotional honesty. Violet represented tradition, formality, and emotional distance. Their conversations felt like elegant battles where each woman tried to outsmart the other without openly admitting they enjoyed the fight. But over time, something unexpected happened. Respect turned into understanding. Understanding slowly became affection. And eventually, these two women became something neither of them would ever comfortably admit aloud. They became necessary to each other. What made that friendship so beautiful was the fact that neither woman truly changed who she was. Violet never transformed into a warm, openly emotional person. Isabel never stopped challenging her beliefs, but they learned to see the loneliness inside each other. Two women who had outlived so much, both trying to navigate a changing world while pretending they were stronger than they actually felt. And perhaps for the first time in Violet's life, she found someone who could look past the armor without demanding she remove it completely. That may be the real story of Violet Crawley. Not the story of a witty aristocrat delivering unforgettable one-liners, but the story of a woman who survived by turning intelligence into protection. A woman who understood that sometimes the only way to survive heartbreak is to wrap it inside humor so sharp that nobody notices the sadness hiding underneath it. And the deeper Downton Abbey went into her story, the clearer it became that Violet Crawley was never truly afraid of change. What she feared was becoming forgotten by a world that no longer resembled the one she gave her life to protecting. There is a moment late in Downton Abbey that changes the entire way you understand Violet Crawley. It does not arrive with dramatic music or some huge emotional speech. In fact, like most important things involving Violet, it happens quietly. She speaks about life, about change, and about how the purpose of living is not to remain the same forever, but to grow and hope that change carries you somewhere better. Coming from almost anyone else, those words would sound simple. But coming from Violet Crawley, they feel enormous. Because suddenly the audience realizes something heartbreaking. This woman who spent years appearing to fight against every modern idea was secretly changing the entire time, quietly, privately, on her own terms. That realization transforms everything that came before it. People often describe Violet as stubborn, but the truth is more complicated than that. She was not protecting old traditions simply because she hated progress. She was protecting memories. Every custom, every social rule, every piece of formality connected her to people and moments that no longer existed, to her generation, to her youth, to a version of the world where life felt stable and understandable. When those traditions disappeared, part of her disappeared with them. That is why she fought so hard to preserve certain things. Not because she believed the past was perfect, but because the past still contained pieces of the people she loved. And nowhere was that more visible than in the story involving Prince Carogan. Out of all the emotional moments in Violet's journey, that storyline may have revealed the deepest truth about her heart. For years, viewers saw her as composed, untouchable, almost impossible to emotionally shake. Then suddenly, this man from her past returns carrying memories of a love she never fully forgot. And for the first time, the audience sees something different in her eyes. Regret, longing, vulnerability. The most painful part is that Violet never allows herself to completely fall into those emotions. Even then, even after all those years, she remains controlled, careful, measured, but the sadness becomes impossible to miss. You begin to understand that this woman who spent decades giving advice to everyone else also carried private wounds she never truly healed from herself. That storyline reframed her entire personality. Her emotional distance no longer felt like arrogance. It felt like protection. Violet Crawley had spent most of her life mastering the art of survival through composure. If she kept her feelings controlled, she could keep moving forward. If she stayed sharp and intelligent and witty, nobody would look closely enough to notice the loneliness underneath. And perhaps that is why audiences connected with her so deeply. Because beneath the elegance and humor, Violet carried emotions that many people understand but rarely admit aloud. The fear of aging, the fear of irrelevance, the fear of watching the world move on without you. She represented something universal hidden inside someone extraordinary. Her relationship with the family also became more emotional the longer the series continued, especially with Mary. By the end of the show, their connection felt less like grandmother and granddaughter, and more like two women recognizing themselves inside each other. Violet saw Mary struggling to balance strength with vulnerability the same way she once had. And although Violet rarely offered comfort in traditional ways, she constantly guided Mary toward becoming stronger without losing herself completely. The brilliance of Violet Crawley is that she never became soft in an unrealistic way. Downton Abbey resisted the temptation to suddenly turn her into a sweet old woman full of open emotion. That would have betrayed everything true about her character. Instead, the series allowed her warmth to reveal itself naturally through small actions, private conversations, and moments of honesty that felt earned rather than forced. Sometimes love looks different depending on who is giving it. For Violet, love looked like advice disguised as criticism. It looked like stepping into family crises before anyone asked her to. It looked like saying difficult truths that others were too afraid to say themselves. She loved fiercely, but she loved in the language life had taught her to speak. A language built from restraint, intelligence, pride, and duty. And that is exactly why her final scenes carry so much emotional weight. By the end of Downton Abbey, Violet is no longer simply the funniest person in the room. She becomes the emotional foundation of the entire story. Even characters who spent years arguing with her slowly realize how much of the family's strength came from her presence alone. She held generations together through chaos, grief, scandals, war, heartbreak, and enormous social change. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, steadily, like someone who believed it was her responsibility to remain strong even when nobody thanked her for it. That is what made Violet Crawley unforgettable. She was never trying to be liked. She was trying to protect the people and values she believed mattered. Sometimes she failed. Sometimes she judged unfairly. Sometimes her pride prevented her from expressing emotions clearly. But she remained deeply human through all of it. And maybe that is why audiences still talk about her years later. Because Violet Crawley was not written like a fantasy. She was written like a real person shaped by time, grief, love, and survival. A woman who learned to hide tenderness behind wit because the world she came from taught her that vulnerability was dangerous. Yet despite all those walls she built around herself, her heart still found ways to reveal itself in the smallest moments. A pause before a sharp reply. A softer look when nobody else noticed. A sentence filled with honesty she almost regretted saying out loud. Those tiny moments told the real story of Violet Crawley better than any of her famous one-liners ever could. In the end, Violet did not leave the world unchanged. She changed with it. Slowly, reluctantly, quietly. And perhaps that was her greatest act of courage. Because for someone who spent her whole life pretending to fear change, she ultimately proved something extraordinary. Growth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it happens in silence, hidden behind dignity, pride, and perfectly timed wit. And that is the real reason Violet Crawley became more than just a television character. She became unforgettable.